conclusion about whether they matched?
There were no matches. None of the reference specimens could contribute to these profiles.
All right. If you'll flip forward to 210F, that's another similar analysis. Can you tell the panel what that's for?
This is also a Y chromosome profile, and it's from a pubic hair combing.
Okay. And were pubic hair combings, that's something, evidence item that you received between the meeting on the 10th and the 21st?
That's correct.
And did you go through with Mr. Nifong the results of your analysis for the pubic combings from Ms. Mangum on that April 21st meeting?
Yes, we did.
And what does this, as an example, what does the first page of Exhibit 210F indicate about the presence of male DNA?
Well, it's really consistent with all of the evidence items that we've looked at up to this point, that there's some male DNA there. The quality and quantity of the DNA is not great, but there is some there. What we do see is indicative of multiple contributors. And really that's the extent of what can be inferred from this plot.
And for this pubic hair, this pubic combing, was the analyst able to compare that with the players' profiles?
Yes.
And what conclusion did they draw?
Again, they concluded that none of the player profiles, none of the suspect profiles could be identified as contributors to this profile. So they were excluded. And
did you go through with Mr. Nifong and the investigators on that April 21st meeting the results or conclusions you just discussed?
Yes, of course, because this specimen had not been looked at previously. This was a new item. So he would want to know that.
And did any, with respect to any of these additional sexual assault kit items or the pubic combings, did any of the DNA you found on any of that match any of the players' profiles or reference specimens?
No, we weren't able to make any identification still between sexual assault kit items or this pubic hair combing to any of the players.
And at that April 21st meeting, did you also discuss, besides the pubic combing and the sexual assault kits, that part of which we've gone through here, did you discuss with him anything that you had found on any of the other evidence items?
Well, we did have an item. Yeah, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
And we had received, the SBI lab had identified a mixture profile of DNA from a fingernail, and they forwarded to us the DNA from that item. That's not an uncommon thing to do, because we were to look at the Y chromosome DNA for that item, which was a test that they were not running at their lab at that time. So we did that. We did that comparison, and we confirmed that there was a mixture of DNA. And we also, at this point, were able to identify what appeared to be a match between one of the suspects and that Y chromosome profile.
And who is that, the potential match?
David Evans, I think.
And you discussed that with Mr. Nifong and the investigators at that April 21st?
Yes, we did. Yes.
Somebody didn't like that.
We're all awake now. We did, and because that was now this brought us from an educational point of view, from a point of view that where the recipient of our work had to understand that it's another level, because now we have a mixture and a match. All right? And though it doesn't appear on the surface to be very different than a mixture and an exclusion, it truly is. Because when you have a mixture of DNA, you then have an infinite number, not an infinite number, but many, many, many different possibilities about how that DNA is strung back together. It's like taking those little kids' beads that plug in from end to end, the triangle and the square and the round thing and the yellow one and the purple one. Well, if you put them all in a bucket, you put two kids' beads in one bucket, and you take them apart and you put them in a bucket. Well, as you pull them out, you don't know which one goes in what order, and so you have to test every single combination in order to know who put those beads in the bucket. Right? And that's where we were at that point, that we have a Y chromosome mixture as well as an autosomal mixture, autosomal meaning DNA in addition to the Y chromosome, and we had to then consider all the possibilities, all the different combinations that would make up that mixture and compare it to the players. So it got a little bit more complex, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. And another thing that happens in a mixture is you have what I call a bowling pin effect. Typical in sexual assault cases when we have mixtures, the mixtures are between a victim and the suspect. And that was true in this case. We had the victim's DNA and somebody else's DNA, and at least two other persons' DNA. And when you have one marker, like a 14 if you would, well, what you don't know is, just like when you go bowling and there's two pins lined up behind another, is that only one marker? Or do you have two people that contributed the 14? Does that make sense? Okay.
One part of that doesn't make sense to me, since you're...
I'm sorry?
What you just... something about what you just said doesn't make sense to me. Since this testing is only for male DNA, so how do you even have a marker from the accuser who's female?
I said that very quickly. We had the DNA from the SBI lab, but we tested it for both general DNA, which means both male and female, and male DNA. So we had a mixture of all the DNA, male and female, that showed a mixture, and we had a Y chromosome DNA that showed a mixture.
Okay.
So I said that quickly. We actually had two different analyses going on. We had what we call Y chromosome DNA, the DNA that we obtained from the male. When we look at a whole body, a person's DNA, without regard to sex or gender, we call that autosomal DNA. And I just said that quickly and didn't explain it.
So Dr. Meehan, to follow up on the chairman's point, not only did you do the YSTR testing for these items, but you also did what the SBI had done, which is the autosomal.
That's correct.
And just to illustrate that point, if you'll look at Exhibit 210F, which is I believe is the pubic combing that we were talking about.
Yes.
We talked about the front page of that. Which analysis is that 210F, the front page?
That's the Y chromosome DNA.
Okay, so what would that indicate about DNA present in terms of the gender?
That there is male DNA obtained from this specimen.
Okay, and it can only be male DNA on this type of analysis.
It doesn't mean that there's only male DNA on the evidence item. It means all I can infer is of male DNA.
Okay. From this analysis.
Shows up
From
on
this Y chromosome analysis.
And then if you flip to page 2 of that same exhibit, can you explain to the panel what that analysis is of?
So it's just on the back of the page. Then on page 2, we have what I was referring to as the autosomal DNA. And here, with autosomal DNA, you expect, if it was a single person, you'd expect to have two markers at each one of the locations. And again, not to oversimplify things, but you have two markers because now we're looking at the DNA that you got from your mom and your dad. So you have two different markers, not necessarily different, two markers at each location. And so when we have a profile produced by one individual, or that's indicative of DNA from one individual, there should never be more than two markers at each location. And if we look at this, we do have more than two markers, just like the SBI lab did, at multiple locations. Markers being indicated by those square boxes. And so it's telling us that we have DNA from at least two individuals.
And there are some sort of handwritten notations on some of these markers that indicate a V. Can you tell the panel what that would signify?
Yeah, that's a notation used by this analyst at the time, indicating that those markers match the victim in the case.
Okay, and so would this particular analysis for this pubic combing have DNA from the victim on it?
Yes, absolutely.
And would it have DNA from someone other than the victim?
And it does, yes.
And did you go through with Mr. Nifong both the YSTR analysis and the autosomal analysis that you had done?
Yes.